Hi everybody, nice to be with you. My name is Michael Millerman, millermanschool.com. In this video, I just wanted to talk to you very briefly about three books that I have read recently that maybe are not explicitly related, but to my mind, they fit together in an important sort of way. So that's Moby Dick by Herman Melville, The Call of the Wild, which is a book that my grandpa used to recommend to me. I never read, and then amazingly enough, one of my children was reading it, thought it was his favorite book and recommended it to me to read. That's by Jack London, Call of the Wild. And the third one is Zorba the Greek, which I just finished reading earlier today. Now, what unites these books to my mind is that they all have something life-affirming in them and about them that is wild and disordered. So to my mind, they're non-Platonic books, or in some sense, even anti-Platonic books. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're Nietzschean books. I did learn that the author of Zorba the Greek studied philosophy with Henri Bergson, who's the philosopher of Vitalism. And this character Zorba in his book represents, in some case, the vitalist philosophy. But let me just very quickly tell you again why these things jumped out at me and stood out to me. So you have, extremely simplified here, an adventure out on the sea. The sea is a wild and unpredictable element. Even if you think about Plato, for instance, in The Laws, a book that I've talked about on this channel and that I teach at my school, there's a focus on the importance of being away from the sea, being away from the water. If you want to have a moral order, a well-ordered legal system, you shouldn't have it too close to the water, because what happens is if you have traders coming from different places, if you have a lot of commerce, in effect, you have a lot of mixing, and that makes it harder to ensure a stable moral order. Okay, you have sailors coming in and out of port, and you have traders. Again, you have kind of a loosening of the moral order and an element of wildness, chaos, unpredictability, and vitality, you could say, that is anti-Spartan, anti-Republican, and that's just too crazy for those people who really want to ensure that things are well ordered. Okay, so that's one of the things. You've got the wildness of the sea, you've got the monomaniacal pursuit of revenge in the case of, anything about the story of Moby Dick. You have Captain Ahab, in effect, seeking out revenge on the whale, Moby Dick, who had chopped off his leg, cut off his leg. So this extremely rich novel. There's so many details to it. Almost every page is worth reading and rereading and thinking about in great detail, but I'm just simplifying this aspect of it for you. So there are references to Plato in Moby Dick, and they at times contrast the contemplative life with the active life in a way that's more favorable, I would say, to the active life. So then the next book I read was Call of the Wild. And in Call of the Wild, again, you have frontier mentality. It's written from the point of view of the dog in the story, Buck, and the many adventures that Buck goes through. And, I was joking with my kids. We go for a walk after having read that book and then seen the movie as well. We'd go for a walk through the forest paths, not too far from our house. And, if normally I'm a contemplative type myself, walking, thinking, mulling, meditating, and all of that, well, suddenly I hear the call of the wild. I pick up a rock, or I pick up a log, or I do something, or scream, or, be wild, a little bit wild, right? You hear the call of the wild. You somehow have gone from order to chaos, from reason to madness, from the land to the sea, from the home to the wilderness. And again, that is something that connects those two books in a way. And I think that if you read Moby Dick, again, keeping in mind, like I said, that it's extremely rich and it contains much more than what I'm saying here to you now about symbolism, about literature, about heaven and hell, about the human condition, okay, all kinds of things. But this element in particular, you read Call of the Wild, read Moby Dick, and then Zorba the Greek, again, to give you a simplified version, it presents a character who's so full of life, and it contrasts this character, Zorba, with the narrator who's kind of a bookish, literary, he's writing originally a manuscript on Buddha. So he's reflective on sort of the emptiness and abstraction and literally, he turns life into words and sort of deprives life of life in doing so. And he meets this character Zorba. Zorba is like full of life, again, maybe representing to some extent the author's view of what a vitalist life would look like. He sings, he dances, he eats, he loves women. He's just full of life. He's bursting from the seams with life. And if you yourself are kind of abstract, bookish, literary, melancholy, withdrawn, introverted, all of these sorts of things that can be used to describe that one character type, and you've ever encountered somebody who's just overflowing with vitality and with life, you can even understand the appeal, the attraction, and why for yourself, a person like that may even be a guru or somebody you want to emulate, or just you think about that person and your life gets enriched, which is kind of the dynamic between the narrator and this character Zorba in the book. And as I later learned, apparently the author, I don't remember his name offhand, but apparently the author actually did meet somebody named Zorba who was actually like that to a certain extent. And it's interesting to see some biographical information there. So these three books, Moby Dick, again, the element of the sea, not this rational, ordered, legal liberty or virtue, but some different wild frontier mentality. Same with Call of the Wild, and this bursting from the seams with life view that you get in Zorba. All of that, to my mind, that fits together as a unit. Excuse me. And I would say something else as well, which is that there are periods in my life, and perhaps in yours as well, where I don't read literature. I don't read fiction. I'll make a separate video on this topic because it's something that I had debated with friends of mine for a long time. I always thought that the best that literature can do is a pale reflection of arguments that you get in their pure and pristine form if you just read philosophy. Like, in some sense, maybe you need 200, 300 pages of character development to set up a moral dilemma. And then the moral dilemma that you encounter in the book, that's what makes it the most interesting thing. But what if you could have just stated the moral dilemma without, 200 or 300 pages of character development, without describing the sunset and the boulevard and the complexions of the characters? What if you just stated the moral dilemma? So save yourself some time and do that. But there are periods in my life, they're pretty distant from one another. I don't know, every 10 years, maybe every 15 years, maybe, where I feel like I have to somehow reconnect in a way that I can't fully explain, but reconnect to humanity, to the human experience, to my own life in this non-abstract way through what we typically regard as literature, properly speaking, fiction. However true to life it may be and however life-giving it is, still, I think you can say, on one hand, Moby Dick, Call of the Wild, Zorba the Greek. On the other hand, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Kant's First Critique, and Heidegger's Being and Time. I think it's fair to say that those are not, in some sense, they're all the written word, but you wouldn't want to call them all literature, even though there's a literary element in the writing of the philosophy books and there's a philosophical element in the fiction, which again can be true to life. But there are these periods. It used to be the case for me that Brothers Karamazov of Dostoevsky was probably the most powerful example. But lately it's been some of these other books. I've also read The Persian Letters by Montesquieu, which is really worth reading if you'd like, independently of Montesquieu's other political thinking. You may want to understand The Persian Letters in relationship to The Spirit of the Laws or something like that. But just by itself, it's an interesting book to read. And Madame Bovary, which is a little bit different, didn't quite have the same effect on me. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath as well didn't quite have the same effect. But I'd say these three in particular, Moby Dick, Call of the Wild, and Zorba the Greek, they're all different, but they all capture this, for me at least, and perhaps for you, and maybe you have books that have done this for you, but they all capture this desire to break free from the ordered domestic life to reconnect with something inside of yourself. Like Zorba says, for example, he says, you have all of these things going for you. He says to the narrator of the book, okay, again, they're close friends, the narrator and Zorba in the book. So Zorba says to him, you have everything, but you're missing something that's so crucial: folly, kind of madness, wildness, something that goes above and beyond reason. And that isn't just like your mystical ecstasy, because there are things that go above and beyond reason that are still a kind of solitary mystical ecstasy. They're still sort of quietistic. They're a kind of personal or private transcendence. But then there is this life that overflows, which is a little bit different. A life that overflows, that sings, that dances, that rejoices, that celebrates. And that is just, that makes you want to sing and rejoice and dance and celebrate. That makes you want to feel and hear the call of the wild. That makes you want to go out and have some sort of adventure, especially if it's been a long time since you've had one. So if you're looking for something to read and you found that to be interesting, Moby Dick, for many, many reasons, is an incredible book and well worth reading. Call of the Wild, something quite short, you can read pretty quickly. And these other things recommended, I wouldn't say it's as good as Moby Dick or as Zorba the Greek, but it can allow you to hear the call of the wild in some sense if that's what you need. And again, the book Zorba the Greek is completely different from the other two, well worth reading, and does it. By the way, there's a lot in Zorba the Greek that you may find if you read. I understand there's a famous movie, but I would recommend reading the book. I can't vouch for the movie. I haven't seen it. But there are things that are questionable. Like, by no means, to my mind, is the character Zorba just absolutely likable in every respect. Not at all. He says things that I don't necessarily think are right. He does things that I don't necessarily think are right. I'll let you read it and decide for yourselves. I don't mean to set him up as a character for emulation. Whereas take Socrates in Plato's Republic. In many respects, I do think, that Socrates is a character for emulation. I don't find Socrates doing and saying all kinds of things that are, where I'm like, I don't know, you can disagree with Socrates' arguments, but you read about Zorba and at times I think, no, that's not somebody that I think you would want to emulate. And at the same time, just he's such a powerful example of something that it's worth familiarizing yourselves with that example and seeing what about it speaks to you and why. And the book itself has many reflections. Like, I think any great book, any great work of literature, to generalize here, is, to my mind, more often than not, maybe, or in the best case scenario, it's a book of life. It's a book of life. So what's a book of life? A book of life isn't necessarily a book that tells you how to live, but it's a book in which you have heaven and hell, birth and death, man and woman, sons and daughters, profit and loss, hope and disappointment, the private and the public. A book of life is a book in which all of these facets and dimensions of the human experience are somehow present. Now, I wouldn't want to say that exhausts all literature, because something I've been wanting to reread lately is by Nabokov. I believe it's called Delusion Defense. And if I remember rightly, it's about a chess player who becomes extremely obsessed with chess. Okay, so it's an account of obsession. So it may not have birth and death and marriage and divorce, life, all of these sorts of things, children, family, friends. It may just be isolating a single component of the human condition, that possibility of total obsession, compulsion, and that experience. So great literature maybe can isolate something that belongs to the human condition and show it to you in all of its ugliness, or all of its beauty, and all of its complexity, and all of its mystery. But for sure, there's a genre of books that I would consider this book of life type thing. And in a way, I guess Zorba is kind of like a book of life. Call of the Wild, probably not so much. Moby Dick, yes. Persian Letters by Montesquieu, in a way, yes. And some of these other ones I mentioned, probably not quite. Madame Bovary, I wouldn't say reached that. Bell Jar wouldn't quite, much lower level for me there. So anyway, It's been a while since I made a video, trying to get back into the habit here of discussing with you what's going on in the world, which philosophers you should be paying attention to and why. And in this case, what I've been reading and why to me it forms a certain sort of coherent unit, why I would recommend some of these books to you if you're interested. And for sure, I'd love to know, in your case, are there books that left such a strong impression on you? And for some of you, it may be films too. That's another thing. I mean, in my book, Beginning with Heidegger, I mentioned a couple of movies. In the Rorty chapter, I mentioned Pi. If you've ever seen that movie, a nice film worth watching, as well as A Serious Man. And that's just preliminary to introduce the chapter. But for sure, there may be movies that leave this kind of impression on you where you watch them and then they shape the way you see the world. For me, the movie Another Round, originally Danish, I think, and in English, it's called Another Round. That was one that I return to from time to time. So I'd love to know what it is for you, books, movies, things that really just shaped the way that you see the world. And again, can any of you relate to what I described about myself, where again, for long periods, I will only read, if you watch this channel, Leo Strauss, Carl Schmitt, Martin Heidegger, Aristotle, Maimonides, the books that I'm surrounded by here, things like this. Something else I was reading earlier in December, The National System of Political Economy by List. Very good. Okay, worth reading. Interesting, insightful. National System of Political Economy. Or here's another one. Eric Kaysen, Crypto Sovereignty, The Political Philosophy of Bitcoin. I'm going to have to talk to you about this book separately. Okay, so usually that's the kind of thing I'm reading, but I just felt in December I had to hear the stories of people's lives. And I had to have characters that I could relate to and scenarios that are not just dry conceptual analysis and not just intellectual puzzles, but somehow that have that beating heart of life in them. And, and that beating heart that conveys life to you as you read it. So hopefully you found this interesting. Again, Michael Millerman, millermanschool.com. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Great to see you. Great to be with you. Sorry that it's been so long between videos. That's just what it is. And talk to you again soon. Take care. Bye.